Today's program, Hardening Operations of Critical Infrastructure for Energy Storage and Renewable Generation for Resilience, will model project scenarios that can be replicated by our audience. Our panelists will provide information on the programs and resources designed to assist with project development and financing for those seeking solutions to prepare their facilities to be resilient against impacts of climate change and extreme weather events. This is the second program in our series. We'd like to take a minute to highlight our various sponsors. BG&E is a voltage sponsor. We're happy to have their support again. Schneider Electric supported the series for the first time this year. Siemens will be highlighting e-mobility in the next week's seminar. Is also a sponsor, and our marquee sponsor for the speaker series once again is CohnReznick. We thank them again. They are an award-winning advisory, assurance, and tax firm. So let's start by introducing our speakers today. We have a really great lineup and a really thoughtful presentation for you. Cherise Seals is a senior account executive for Noresco. As I said, you can read all their bios online, but I wanted to let you know a little bit about each of them personally. Cherise's favorite Halloween costume ever was when she went as Wonder Woman. And I think that's an appropriate costume for Cherise. Dave Wright is the director of project development with Groundswell. Dave is proud of the fact that at the age of 12, he designed a haunted forest for his neighborhood. Brandon Bowser is the energy program manager, CHP and resilience with the Maryland Energy Administration. We're always happy to have Brandon on board. And Brandon's favorite Halloween costume was when he dressed as a hippie, which he said from the 70s, that made me feel really old, and complete with the Afro hairdo, which certainly you would never guess looking at Brandon today. And then finally, Brandy Espinola, who's the Climate and Sustainability Program Manager with the Environmental Finance Center at the University of Maryland. And Brandy recalls going as Catwoman when she was 8 years old as being her favorite costume. So we've asked our panelists to take a look at this topic to help us define hardening, to understand why communities and facilities managers need to think about hardening critical infrastructure and creating resilience hubs. What are some examples of projects that fall into this description? And what do site managers and community leaders need to know about designing, building, operating, and managing resilient facilities? And then finally, funding and financing these types of projects. So we hope at the end of the session, you'll leave a little more informed about this topic. So our first presenter this morning, we welcome Cherise Seals from Noresco.
Well, good morning, Kathy, and thank you, MCEC, for this invitation. And thanks to all of you for taking the time to talk about this very important topic. I actually had a little infrastructure issue myself this morning as my internet wouldn't work, and I'm accustomed to working from home, so all my creature comforts are gone, but I am in my home office, and hopefully you're able to hear me fine, or not my home office, but my company's office, and you're able to hear me quite fine. So you can move on to the next slide. So Noresco has been in the business of working with clients such as governmental, institutional, as well as governmental clients for over 40 years. We are a part of the Carrier Corporation. Carrier Global is our parent. And as over the past 40 years, we've been focusing on satisfying energy and infrastructure goals for those customers. As the conversation has truly shifted from just energy savings to sustainability and climate action objectives, our focus has broadened to meet those customer challenges. And as this global descriptor that's on the screen would indicate, we are actually a global company working all across the globe. And as ESCO is certainly a part of our name and will always be at the core, as we are an energy solutions provider. And as our name attests, metrics such as decarbonization, electrification, sustainability, and certainly resiliency are the hallmarks for actually hardening operations of critical infrastructure. I know when I look at our core and how we started, I mentioned that our focus is decarbonization, electrification, modernization for governmental and institutional clients. We've done this for more than achieving more than $5 billion in savings for customers across the globe. And probably more importantly, as we talk about sustainability, impacting their carbon reduction significantly. So when I think of defining hardening infrastructure, it's going to be different, really depending on the customer. But as the nucleus of mission critical truly has been a term that's been used by the federal government for years, I know more commercial and institutional clients are really looking at how they can actually harden their infrastructure and look at those things that are critical not only to their solvency, but absolutely need to be backed up so that they can serve their constituents. So at Noresco, we help customers define what that specifically means for them. So it's a different definition for everybody, and develop the components that are necessary to help them meet those objectives. The most commonly done, this is most commonly done now through exploration of microgrids. And I know I was watching the news recently, and certainly if you've seen what's going on in Puerto Rico, the installation and utilization of microgrids will be critical to their ability to get back online. And certainly, as this topic is focused a little bit more on battery energy storage and PV, that will too be a part of what's going to happen and be successful in helping the folks in Puerto Rico. But oftentimes, battery energy storage and PV are part of those microgrid solutions. Noresco itself has actually installed more than 300 megawatts of generation and distributed energy across the many projects that we've done. And we've had help customers move in that direction of, again, hardening their infrastructure and being able to focus on the resiliency. While the examples that I'll share today are mainly with our federal customers, my focus truly is state, local, and institutional clients working within this area. And a lot of the projects I'm working on are more in their infancy, so I don't want to get ahead of myself in sharing too much information, but certainly our local customers are very much interested in looking at resiliency as well. So next slide. So this is just a general depiction of, as I mentioned, some of the pieces and parts that would be part of any type of microgrid system or would be considered as you're looking at hardening your infrastructure. Generators in general tend to be the base. There's normally going to be either a natural gas or diesel type generator that's at the hub, and that's kind of holding the base for that microgrid structure. And the solar and battery would act as additional inertia points to help further balance that load. The projects that I've noted here are various, as I mentioned, federal type projects that we've worked on or in the process of working on, because they're in investment grade audit stage, which is a term that many of you should be familiar with. It's a more advanced stage of development for the project. And as I mentioned before about federal government really focusing on their critical infrastructure, I can't highlight the specifics of the critical infrastructure for federal clients, as you know, it's on a need to know basis. But the important thing to note here is that these customers are not only international as well as across many states within the US. What else should I share here? So another thing I'll note just from here is that several of the key partners, in order for these systems to work, there's several key partners that are actually involved. And without giving any particular company a commercial, This isn't something that you go into alone. So if you're working with Noresco, we have several other partners that are not only product manufacturers, but subcontractors, as well as some additional engineering firms that help support our already internal engineering resources to help you meet that solution, to help you with your microgrid or hardened infrastructure. The key point to note here again is that it starts, as I said before, with the gen sets, and the PV as well as battery energy storage tends to help balance the system or offer that inertia that's necessary. Because the sun doesn't always shine, the battery backup is certainly helpful in those installations. But the 5 projects that are noted here on the side range in size from anywhere from 4 megawatt systems up to 40 megawatts with battery energy storage that's mentioned for islanding capability as well. Next slide. A little bit more specifics on one project in particular, as the naval submarine base that we have in New London, which is in Groton, Connecticut. And you can see here that what's noted is that unfortunately battery energy storage nor solar were actually part of this project, but are generally explored. It really, I guess the key thing to note is that PV, as many of you are very aware, is dependent, or the value of installing PV is very much dependent on where you're located. Because you're looking at the value associated with SRECs. So for this installation, it didn't make sense, but the key parameters that were a part of their resiliency effort were the fuel cell, as I mentioned, a diesel generator, which again serves as the base, and then a full-fledged CHP plant, which helped run the full encompassing of the submarine campus. And kind of true and blue to my heart, the fiber optic upgrade, because I probably needed one this morning since my system didn't work, but a full fiber optic loop was also part of this, because cybersecurity is often one of the key motivators that encourage customers to put in a microgrid solution. They're concerned about some type of cyber attack that could actually impact either their utility service itself. So having your own system certainly can help to prevent that type of intrusion. But this microgrid also has black start capabilities, also runs through load shedding, as well as controls optimization. Next slide. So when we talk about battery energy storage, I thought this was a useful slide to share. And this is from the Energy Information Administration. I thought it was helpful to see what the trends are looking like as we're talking about battery energy storage moving forward. For those of you not aware, the area that we are in, the ISO, or the independent system operator that Maryland is actually part of, is PJM. And you can see that little blue sliver that represents what type of cumulative battery energy capacity that is focused in this area. But you can see the installation and the thought thereof for installing battery energy storage is growing and has been growing exponentially over many, many years. And part of, again, that motivation is the fact that costs have come down for battery energy storage systems. And again, as we look more and more into finding solutions that help us meet those sustainability as well as resiliency goals, battery energy storage will continue to play a huge part in that. One other thing I wanted to note, it's not specifically listed here, but one of the questions I think you asked us about was resources. that are helpful as you're considering these things. And probably before you look at anything, one of the resources you might want to look at is desireusa.org, which basically is a compilation across many states of what types of programs and incentives that are available to help as you're looking at these types of projects. So it includes everything from energy efficiency initiative or energy efficiency incentives to, thank you, someone put it on the chat, energy efficiency incentives to CHP, as well as microgrid type incentives that will help you move forward with these types of projects. And also, given that this slide, the EIA website is helpful just for doing some of your initial homework to know what's going on, what's driving the industry, and what's important. Next slide. This is just further evidence of battery energy storage applications. You can see there's a breadth of applications that are useful for battery energy storage. But again, if you pay attention to the colors and the metrics as you're moving forward, you can see what PJM, which is the blue, which is our area, and how we're a big driver, not only in looking at, the capacity, but also the energy needs and how we're going to use it, most specifically in terms of as it relates to installed capacity or help assisting with frequency regulations. But there's several other applications that you can see are noted here. And with that, I'll pass the baton back to Kathy, and feel free to contact me if you are interested in exploring these types of discussions, because every project is individual. I know within this industry, I know we often say that if you've done one microgrid, you've done one microgrid, because every single one is different and every customer has unique needs. So look forward to speaking with you and continuing on with the discussion.
Therese, before we let you go, let me just ask you to address one question.
Certainly.
Can you talk about what is a black start and what does that mean?
Sure. Black start is having the capability to get back online without the help of the grid, so that your system is operable and able to get back on without incident.
Thank you. So just a couple observations for our audience. As you can see, NORESCO is working with federal installations, particularly military bases, obviously sort of leading the way in this because they have a mandate to be responsive regardless of the circumstances. And that's true also, I think, for local governments and campuses who are trying to serve a particular constituent audience with critical infrastructure. The value of an energy services company like NORESCO is the ability to pull together all the different resources to make a project happen in a centralized way. And there are a number of ESCOs out there who can do that, but I think for our audience to benefit from, if you want to do a project and you want to look at the options, working with an entity like an ESCO to design a project and to look at your assets is something to think about. Our next presenter is Dave Wright with Groundswell. Dave, you're up.
All right, thank you so much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. All right, well, thank you, Kathy and team, and Therese, thanks for your presentation. Really interesting to learn more about your world. I think there's some overlap with the work that I do as well. I think of Groundswell as a form of an ESCO, even though we're a nonprofit. We're pretty small. We have about 20 people, 20 strong, but we're sort of a mini nonprofit version of an ESCO. We're based in DC, but we do programs and projects in 6 different states, primarily in the Mid-Atlantic, but we're also working in Illinois and New York State, as well as Georgia. Our programs and projects are really centered around reducing household energy burdens. And we do that by developing solar and battery projects, by delivering customer enrollment and support programs, and then also by conducting some research and demonstration projects as well. And at this point, our programs and projects are serving over 5,500 low and moderate income households with more than $2.75 million per year in energy savings. So really glad to be part of the panel here today and introduce some of the work that I do and that we do at Groundswell. I think to get back at one of the questions that framed this conversation today, why does hardening matter? And I was going to mention exactly what Cherise pointed out, which is you have to look no further than the headlines of today's paper, news websites where you've got 3 million residents in Puerto Rico, and the vast majority of them are without power from Hurricane Fiona. And I think I saw another million or so without running water in the Dominican Republic. It's only going to get more intense. Climate change induced weather events are one example of disruptive phenomena that will, I think, only continue to increase as the world gets more volatile. And so I think it's really important to consider what we can do to our built environment to not avoid, because I don't think we can avoid disruption, but mitigate the impact of disruption in the future. And at Groundswell, we also like to think about the equity implications of resilience. So, for example, folks may be familiar with the term energy burden, but if you're not, I'll just define it quickly. It's the percentage of income in a household that's spent on energy costs. So just to give you an idea, I think the average in the US for non-low income households is about 3%. So 3% of households costs go towards energy. I think for low income households, it's about 3 times that. On average, it's around 8 or 9%. And in some areas, depending on where you live, that can be as high as 30%, 30. So there's some significant impacts on, economic well-being, household finances due to energy costs. And when you have that sort of vulnerability in a community to start with, for example, you may have households that don't turn on their air conditioning because they can't afford it, right? So during a heat wave, they're already in a hot house. Then all of a sudden the power goes out and they're starting from a point of already being hot. And therefore there's this additional kind of hidden vulnerability that's not always visible or quantifiable, but going into this outage event, that household would be, more at risk of the implications of an extended power outage. So at any rate, just to kind of paint a picture, those are the kind of things that we like to think about when we're talking about designing for energy resilience. Obviously, energy is a critical piece of the puzzle, but there are other aspects of resilience as well. We don't need to go into those as much today, but the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, I think, has done a lot of foundational work on this topic, and there's some other elements that they consider when they talk about resilience hubs, such as like communications protocols and services and programming. So just to kind of set the scene a little bit, there are other things to consider when we're talking about resilience beyond strictly the energy piece. And just to flesh out a little bit more about what Groundswell has done in this realm, we've been partnering with the city of Baltimore for a number of years to implement solar and storage projects as part of their Community Resiliency Hub program, which has received support from MEA. I want to shout out to MEA for their fantastic resilience programs, and I know you'll hear about that next, I think. We are replicating the work that we've done in Baltimore in Montgomery County currently, again, funded with support from MEA. And there was also some work that we have conducted and are continuing to pursue in Atlanta around a solar and storage project under the NREL Solar Energy Innovation Network, where we've looked at designing a resiliency center that's supported by a solar and battery project at Spelman and Morehouse College in Atlanta. So happy to share more about that as needed, but wanted to give a few examples. And I'll go into that a little bit more in the next slide. So wanted to share 2 examples of projects in Baltimore that are similar sort of structure in terms of the equipment and how they're being funded. These are both nonprofit organizations in Baltimore. Empowerment Temple is a church, AME Church. City of Refuge is a faith-affiliated services organization. Both of these projects are in the design and engineering phase for a resiliency hub. They will be designed to automatically island from the grid when the grid is down, and will be able to power critical loads, which, again, we have to work with the facility to define exactly what those are. But in general, there's essentially a basic lighting, heating and cooling, and refrigeration, as well as some other site-specific loads that may need to be included. And per MEA's requirements, we're designing the equipment to have at least a 50% chance of providing full functionality for those critical loads for a 3-day power outage. So that's kind of a design standard that MEA sets in their Resiliency Hub program. Both of these organizations already participate in Baltimore's voluntary Resiliency Hub program. So they're able to open their doors to the community when called upon. And I should probably give you a little bit more of a sense of the Baltimore program, because it is, I think, a really great model for other areas within and beyond Maryland, I think. It's essentially a partnership between frontline community organizations within Baltimore's climate vulnerable neighborhoods and the city government. So that's the Office of Sustainability, the Office of Emergency Management, and the Department of Health. So the goal of this program is essentially to better connect these community organizations that are already on the front lines of community services with resources, so that in the event of a natural disaster or an emergency of some kind, there is capacity to provide response, safety and recovery resources to these underserved neighborhoods and their residents. So we work closely with the Office of Sustainability in Baltimore, which is the lead agency responsible for coordinating the program. But again, it's very much a support role. It's not necessarily a top-down kind of managed program. It's equipping these frontline organizations with resources so they can better carry out their mission. And both of these projects that I'm highlighting here will provide ongoing cost savings to their respective organizations by lower electricity bills. In one case, City of Refuge will actually own the system itself. In another case, the Empowerment Temple, it'll be a third-party owned system, so a PPA, power purchase agreement arrangement. But both organizations stand to save a significant amount on their electricity bills through these projects. Next slide, please. Just want to give a picture of what this project will look like. Again, this is in the engineering phase. Excuse me. The solar array is about 110 kilowatts. So these are all relatively small projects. We think of them as medium-sized in our world, but compared to the projects that Teresa was talking about, these are small projects. The battery will be 120 kilowatts and 500 kilowatt hours. Over the course of 20 years, we estimate the facility will save nearly $400,000 on its electricity costs. And the financing of this project is supported by the MEA Resiliency Hub grant program through a grant that's covering about 2/3 of the installation cost of the system. So the additional funding that's coming in is private financing that's been secured, but project couldn't be done without support from MEA. So we're grateful for that. And we're on track to begin construction on this in Q4. City of Refuge, just to give you a sense, it's located in the middle of the Brooklyn neighborhood in South Baltimore, which is one of the city's most industrialized neighborhood. And I think it's about 40% of the residents there live below the federal poverty level. So this is a great organization that's seeking to support individuals on their journey to self-sufficiency. So they provide a lot of meal service, job training, supportive housing, after-school programs, and things like that. So we're really pleased to be able to help them out so they can do more of the great work that they're doing. Next slide, please. Empowerment Temple. Empowerment Temple is a fairly well-known AME church in West Baltimore, Northwest Baltimore. We've had a fairly long history with Empowerment Temple. Luckily, through the MEA Resiliency Hub program, we're able to secure some funds to enable them to also get a solar and battery project. The stats are listed here. It's roughly the same size as the City of Refuge project. This one, however, will be third-party owned. So we have a private financier that will own the system and be able to capture the tax credits. And then again, the remainder will be covered by the MEA grant. And construction, again, we hope to begin in Q4 of this year. Empowerment Temple has been acting as a resiliency hub for some time in the cities program. There's an example where, I mentioned the hurricane and severe weather. Obviously, that's one type of disruptive event. But in 2020, there was a gas leak in the neighborhood at a home that caused an explosion, destroyed 4 different homes that were adjacent to each other. That was within about a mile of Empowerment Temple. And the church immediately stepped up to support the community and opened its doors, in coordination with the city, and was able to sort of serve in its capacity as a resiliency hub and offer whatever support was needed. So I hope that this example and others that I've shared give you a sense of the nature of the Baltimore program and why we think it's so great, and the work that we hope to continue to do.
Thank you, Dave. Great examples, and just really amazing Groundswell's work in general. Another good resource for our audience. I think important points to note here that Dave mentioned is that this is not just about resilience, and that scale is important in thinking about a project, that this is also about cost savings for those clients and community stakeholders. This is about self-sufficiency for communities in a situation where they might not otherwise be, and about security for our nation, as we saw with Sharice's examples. So, we start with how we can piece together energy technologies and at the same time reduce the load on the grid, increase the capacity for clean energy generation. But it really does require us to understand how this benefits our communities. So with that in mind, I'm going to go to our next speaker. We're happy to have Brandon Bowser here from the Maryland Energy Administration to talk about their programs and the work they're doing in this space. Hi, Brandon.
Hi, Kathy. Can everybody hear me all right? Excellent. Good morning, everybody. And to echo my colleagues so far, thank you for having me here today. Sharice and Dave, both excellent presentations. It's very interesting to see what you've been working on in this space. As Dave mentioned, we have a number of resiliency-focused programs that have been able to benefit the Baltimore Resiliency Hubs that they've been working on. So that was a very, very good overview. And Dave, thank you for the accolades. We very much appreciate it. But for those of you who do not know who I am, I'm Brandon Bowser, the Energy Resilience Program Manager with the Maryland Energy Administration, or as we call ourselves, MEA for short. I manage a suite of incentive programs and work on several initiatives that focus on helping Maryland organizations design and install microgrids and other resilient energy systems to safeguard our state's critical infrastructure, communities, businesses, and other organizations from the harmful effects of power outages. I'm also a member of the Public Service Commission's Distribution System Planning Work Group under its PC 44 Grid Modernization Initiative, and I also lead MEA's Emergency Management Team. And today, as you can see on the slide in front of you, I'm here to talk a bit about how our office is working to make a more resilient Maryland. Next slide, please. So first, a little bit about MEA. We are the state of Maryland's energy office. Our job is to promote affordable, reliable, and clean energy for Maryland. And there are two primary ways that we do this. One, we offer incentive programs and resources to help Maryland organizations and residents install clean energy, energy efficiency, and energy resilience measures that both benefit them and contribute to Maryland's energy and greenhouse gas reduction goals. And second, we advise the governor and Maryland General Assembly on energy matters. So, as you can all imagine, we're a pretty busy agency, given the state of the energy industry, which is an exciting place to be right now. And you can also see pictured here is Dr. Mary Beth Tung, our director. Next slide, please. So while MEA offers a wide array of energy incentives, today's discussion focuses on our resiliency portfolio. I'd like to take some time to talk a little bit about those, including their history, their structure, and the current offerings. 4 programs have generally comprised our portfolio listed below. You can see the Resilient Maryland Program, the Resilient Maryland Capital Development Program, our Resiliency Hub Grant Program, as Dave mentioned a little bit, and our Combined Heat and Power, or CHP program. So I'm going to talk a little bit in more detail about those now. Next slide, please. So first, let's start with the Resilient Maryland Program. It has been one of our most impactful energy resilience programs since its inception in 2020. We launched it right before the COVID outbreak, which, as we all very well know, forced us to take a very hard look at the vulnerabilities in our modern world, those vulnerabilities that our modern world has, and what happens when crucial supply chains and resources are disrupted and resilience is tested. This led, of course, to a shift in focus in the energy industry on the vulnerabilities of the electricity grid and what solutions are needed to help enhance overall power reliability. Microgrids and other distributed energy resource, or DER for short, systems aren't a new concept, but they've certainly been one of the topics of interest over the past few years. And like any energy improvement project, they take a lot of conceptualization, consideration, planning, and stakeholder support in order to be successfully developed and installed. Now, due to this often complex nature, microgrids and other DER systems require a considerable amount of pre-construction planning, which carries a significant cost to any organization that's considering them. The problem is that these organizations typically don't have free or affordable capital available to pay for it. So many of them never make it out of concept, and thus we have the make or break point for a lot of these projects. This is where the Resilient Maryland Program has come in to help. The program was designed to provide microgrid and DER system pre-construction planning grants to Maryland organizations to help them pay for those costs. Awardees have used their Resilient Maryland planning grants to produce critical feasibility studies, preliminary engineering and designs, financial models, greenhouse gas reduction projections, and analyses of potential barriers to the installation of the systems. These deliverables are key to gaining critical project stakeholder support. They paint a clear picture of the resilient energy system, articulate its value proposition, and as such, help mitigate perceived risk by clearly defining the financial viability so that favorable financing can be sought. To date, MEA has awarded 30 Resilient Maryland grants across a very wide array of communities, critical infrastructure, businesses, higher learning institutions, multifamily housing, food supply chain stakeholders, and agricultural operations, just to name a few. Several have progressed to installation, and I'll be showcasing a few of those today later on in my presentation. So, the success of the Resilient Maryland Program showed MEA that there is a clear and healthy appetite for resilient energy systems across the state, and a lot of people are ready to move forward on installing the systems. That led us to develop just last year in FY22, the Resilient Maryland Capital Development Pilot Program. This pilot offered capital installation funds to Maryland communities and organizations so that they could install microgrids to bring resilience to critical infrastructure, help improve energy equity to disadvantaged and vulnerable communities, and safeguard the operations of critical regional employers and institutions like colleges and universities while incorporating students into the analysis to create clean energy workforce development opportunities. MEA made an award to Frostburg State University under this program, which you'll hear a bit about later on in my presentation. Now, the Resiliency Hub Grant Program, that one began back in fiscal year 19, and that was developed by my colleague David Comis, who is MEA's Senior Solar Program Manager. The program provides funds to Maryland organizations to help fund solar and battery storage systems so that their facilities can become resiliency hubs. Dave touched a little bit on this in his presentation, but just to give you a quick rundown again, a resiliency hub is an easily accessible local location where community members can go in order to in power outage and emergency situations, where they can receive access to power for their essential electronic devices, such as cell phones, laptop computers, and portable medical equipment, remain in safe and healthy conditioned space, and access refrigeration for temperature-sensitive items like medications. The idea is that they can access the Resiliency Hub benefits until power is safely restored to their community or until more robust emergency services can arrive. This is also a very popular MEA program, which I'll talk more about in one of the case studies later on in the presentation. Now, to wrap this all up here, I guess, well, one more thing to talk about on the Resilient Maryland front. For FY23, we're looking to combine the Resilient Maryland Planning, Capital Development, and Resiliency Hub grant programs into one omnibus resiliency program simply called Resilient Maryland. While details are not yet finalized, and we will finalize those once we launch the FY23 program in the next few weeks, we envision that all of the programs together will be integrated so that administrative burden can be eased, and there is one comprehensive framework under which Maryland organizations can access planning, development, and installation funds for microgrids, DER systems, and resiliency hub energy infrastructure. And finally, our Combined Heat and Power, or CHP program, is our oldest resiliency-focused program. It was started back in FY15 by one of my predecessors. It provides grants to Maryland organizations for the installation of qualified CHP systems at their facilities. For those unfamiliar, a CHP system is an energy generator that can produce both electricity and useful recoverable thermal energy from a single source of fuel. They come in many forms, such as reciprocating combustion engines, turbines, micro CHP systems, or those that are under 60 kilowatts in capacity, and fuel cells. CHP systems are often paired with solar PV and battery storage systems in microgrid setups because they are ideal baseload generators that can dramatically reduce energy and heat generation overhead costs. The CHP program has been immensely popular across Maryland. To date, we've incented over 40 awards, which represent over 66 megawatts of distributed CHP generation at an overall portfolio incentive value of $12 million from the Strategic Energy Investment Fund. So, as you can see, all of these programs provide impactful incentives to help Maryland organizations design, develop, and install comprehensive resilient energy systems to safeguard them from power outages, produce more efficient and affordable energy, and positively contribute to their sustainability goals and those of the state of Maryland. Next slide, please. So, why exactly should resiliency be funded? Why do we do this? Well, there are a lot of different reasons here, and I tried to capture the key ones right here on this slide before you. First, we need access to clean, affordable, and reliable energy to power our lives, businesses, and critical services and infrastructure. Our energy grid also continues to experience a growing number of threats and vulnerabilities from a changing climate, bad actors, and its own aging infrastructure that needs replaced and expanded. And most importantly, every single Marylander deserves access to clean and resilient energy sources, especially so for those Marylanders that have and continue to disproportionately experience various socioeconomic and environmental vulnerabilities and challenges. Investing in the resilience of their communities creates a tremendous positive impact in many different ways, such as reducing energy burden, as Dave talked a little bit about, and reliance on dirtier sources of energy. And as we discussed previously, microgrids and DER systems bring benefits that directly help achieve the state's clean energy, greenhouse gas reduction, and energy efficiency goals. It's also no lie. Demand for resilient energy systems is and will continue to accelerate, which presents an excellent opportunity to invest in a locally sourced and robust clean energy industry that provides good, well-paying careers for Marylanders. And finally, as I mentioned in my discussion on Resilient Maryland, gaining stakeholder and funding support is the most crucial step in installing microgrids and DER systems, and it's also the most challenging. Maryland investment in resilient energy systems and solutions is vital to overcome these challenges and realize the benefits and meet our goals. So slide change, please. All right, and now for the fun part. I'd like to share some of our spotlight projects funded through the Resiliency Incentive Portfolio. There were so many excellent projects to choose from, so this is only a taste of what we've seen and what we will continue to see as the program continues to be offered. I've selected 3 for all of you today. Those are Frostburg State University, Groundswell and their project in Baltimore. I know that Dave talked a little bit about that. I just want to expand on it a bit. And finally, the Housing Initiative Partnership in Prince George's County, who's working to install a block microgrid, which I'll talk more about. Next slide, please. All right, so let's start with FSU. They were one of our very first Resilient Maryland Planning awardees back in 2020. They used their $100,000 in planning funds to design a campus microgrid to bring the benefit of clean, efficient, and resilient energy to their campus, both in normal, or what's known as blue sky, and power outage, or what's referred to as dark sky situations. A major benefit that came from this project, which MEA admittedly did not foresee originally when we made the grant, was the inclusion of student interns in the Resilient Maryland project. This led to clean energy workforce development opportunities for them. Not only do they participate in the analysis in the project, but FSU has begun developing clean energy certification and degree programs as a direct result of pursuing its microgrid. The analysis is actively being incorporated into those programs, and we're actually seeing other Maryland colleges and universities adopt the model. Allegheny College of Maryland received an FY22 Resilient Maryland grant for this type of model, as did Bowie State University, and in fiscal year 2021, the University of Maryland did as well. From what we've seen, it's a highly scalable and replicable model. The microgrid itself will be comprised of approximately 3 megawatts of solar PV, 1 megawatts of fuel cell CHP, and an advanced thermal energy management system that will include absorption chilling and hot and chilled water storage and dispatch. This project has actually progressed to installation, and just this year received a Resilient Maryland Capital Development Grant from the pilot that I mentioned earlier, in the amount of $750,000 to help pay for those costs. And the benefit does not stop at the university or the workforce development either. The surrounding Frostburg community will be able to access one of the buildings on the campus during power outage and emergency situations, because the microgrid will provide power for it to become an officially designated emergency shelter for the students and the community residents. It's a very, very cool project, and we're so excited to see it hitting the ground running. Slide change, please. And next we have Groundswell, which Dave talked a lot about in his panel earlier, the Baltimore City project. Their FY20 grant, they were one of our original Resilient Maryland awardees as well, was approximately $300,000, and it was given to help them pay for the costs of identifying multiple sites across the city of Baltimore to serve as resiliency hubs under a networked approach, and for conducting the necessary feasibility analysis and pre-construction planning for the solar PV and storage systems to serve each candidate site. They were brought on to do this by, as Dave talked about, the city of Baltimore under its Resiliency Hub program. And here's one of the many, many things I love about the project. Groundswell incorporated its many hours of expertise into creating, running, and managing an effective community outreach campaign to identify community sites that had both the space and the trust of their community members to provide Resiliency Hub services. Now, we all know people will only use a service if they trust the service, and Groundswell recognized that. They recognize that friendly, trusted faces from organizations that are important to their communities were perfect to serve as resiliency hubs. Through their shared efforts, Groundswell and Baltimore City identified 26 viable sites across the city. They completed the pre-construction planning deliverables for each one, and several have now moved to installation and are benefiting from MEA's Resiliency Hub grant program, as Dave explained in more detail to you. The project has also received substantial energy industry attention. And because the model has been so successful, Groundswell, as you heard, they actually received an FY22 Resilient Maryland grant to replicate these efforts in Montgomery County. Slide change. And finally, last but certainly not least, is the Housing Initiative Partnership, or HIP for short. HIP is a Prince George's County-based nonprofit housing developer dedicated to revitalizing neighborhoods. MEA awarded them a nearly $80,000 FY20 Resilient Maryland grant to help pay for the costs of designing a community microgrid to serve a block of 6 new construction net zero energy homes in Fairmount Heights, Maryland, which is a community just outside of Washington, D.C. Once they're completed, the homes will be offered exclusively to Marylanders that experience low to moderate income. The microgrid itself will consist of solar PV arrays that are mounted on top of each home, individual front-of-the-meter combination energy storage and microgrid control modules, and a shared battery bank that everyone in the block community can access. And now this is the really cool part about this project. The microgrid will allow the homes to share energy with each other as needed. This makes the resiliency benefits more dynamic and optimized for the residents. And finally, each resident will have the opportunity to opt into receiving notifications for planned and unplanned outages from the utility PEPCO, as well as access an energy dashboard where they'll be able to see their energy usage and available battery storage when the grid is down. This can help inform them on their energy-related decisions when power is finite during outage situations. Additionally, MEA awarded HIP a special innovation grant in FY21 due to the innovative nature of the microgrid for $200,000. The project will explore the introduction of direct current or DC appliances and the viability of incorporating DC infrastructure into the microgrid itself. The benefit to be explored here is the efficiency gain from reducing the amount of conversions between direct current and alternating current. And as many of us on this call today know, each conversion results in a little bit of electricity loss. The less electricity loss, the less power that must be produced to give the power needed to the appliances that need it, and the more efficient the microgrid is. Slide change, please. All right, so as you can see, MEA clearly sees the benefit in investing in energy resilience technologies and solutions as part of our overall agency mission. And again, I thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today and welcome any questions you might have at the end of the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Brandon. Excellent information for our audience. Just really great case study examples of what can be done. Our next presenter we're really pleased to have is Brandy Espinola. She's the program manager with the Environmental Finance Center. Brandy, you're up. And let me just remind the audience that now is a great time to plug your questions into the Q&A so that as soon as our presenters are finished, we can start to address your questions. Thank you, Brandy.
Excellent. Thank you, Kathy. And thank you for facilitating such a great panel today and for inviting the Environmental Finance Center at the University of Maryland to be a part of this webinar series. When Kathy first invited us, I was like, are you sure you want us there? We're not the technical experts on energy projects, and we don't do actual design and build like some of the other presenters on today's call. And Kathy assured us, she's like, no, we really want to have your perspective. The work that you do with local governments is very important, and the capacity building and being able to connect to resources is valuable, especially as it pertains to environmental finance. So my name is Brandy Espinola. I'm a program manager. I do the Climate and Resilience Program at the Environmental Finance Center. And as I mentioned, we really have the privilege at the EFC to work with local governments across the region, really to better understand general environmental challenges, and identify community-based solutions and develop funding and financing strategies that can help advance implementation of various initiatives. So we don't just do energy at EFC, we do all sorts of things like stormwater, climate change, resilience, outside of just the energy sphere. And generally what we find is unfortunately probably many of you know, developing appropriate funding strategies and securing funding for any types of projects, especially environmental projects and energy projects, can be incredibly challenging. And there are lots of big barriers to executing these projects. And there are no silver bullets, it can be very challenging to piece these things together. So at the Environmental Finance Center, we really help to try to build capacity of local governments through capacity building trainings, through technical assistance. We help do policy analysis and financial assessment, and do some community outreach and facilitation in order to help the communities be able to advance their initiatives. So with regards to capacity building, we're really working on expanding local knowledge, both of local leaders who oftentimes have some of the levers of power, as well as expanding the local knowledge of staff members and even residents to help build support and buy-in for these projects. With regards to supporting through policy analysis and financial assessment, we help to identify resources and identify funding and financing opportunities to match those up with local priorities and local projects. And then, one of the themes that I've heard throughout today's webinar is the importance of community buy-in and bringing the community along for these projects to actually be able to have the support to take off, and engaging the community throughout the project. And so we really do help with community outreach and facilitation, designing outreach campaigns, facilitating focus groups, and conducting community surveys or community meetings. We find that if we are developing projects, whether it be energy or climate in general, we really want to make sure that there's buy-in and that the goals of the community are being addressed through the projects that are being implemented. So next slide, please. So when we talk about developing resilience funding strategies for these projects, we're really thinking about it from a comprehensive standpoint. As I mentioned before, there is no simple solution to funding and financing these municipal efforts. And so really, how do we think about building that capacity to increase energy storage and renewable generation? How do we think about prioritizing these projects when there are many other priorities throughout this community? And so we try to think about it in a holistic way. And think about integrating plans and planning efforts, right? Many of these communities have been doing different planning efforts over time. And so how does their energy and renewable generation goals fit in with their larger strategy? We think about wanting to embed funding into these discussions early and often in the planning process. Oftentimes we find that it's not until the end of a planning process that communities start to consider where they're going to get their funding from. They might not even start looking for grant opportunities or financing strategies until they've completed their plan. But one of the things we do when we work with communities is really emphasize the need to think about that early in the process and start identifying those opportunities. We've worked with MEA for many years now. With many of our communities, we've helped them through the Maryland Smart Energy Communities grant program, which is really being used to help communities with their renewable generation as well as their energy efficiency goals. And so helping those communities think about how those programs that MEA provides, those services, can be integrated into their planning process early on. The other thing that we really help communities think through is establishing a portfolio of viable implementation projects. What are the various suite of opportunities that they have within their community that they can advance, rather than thinking about them in silos. So rather than say just doing a lighting project, we want them to consider how lighting and renewable or on-site energy storage and renewable can pair up, and how they can build a portfolio of projects instead of just one-offs. The other thing is, in addition to talking about what sort of funding is available, we really encourage folks to think about cost reducing strategies. So are there procurement tools, which I know MCEC has really been working hard towards developing great procurement tools that communities can take advantage of when they're thinking about exploring different projects so that they can help reduce the cost, right? These aren't funding mechanisms or a grant per se, but it's ways to bring the cost of the project down. And then we really help to think through and evaluate the various funding suites. Again, right now there are lots of grant opportunities both at MEA and at the federal level that communities can sometimes have a hard time navigating. And so we really help provide technical assistance thinking through all those options. Lastly, we really encourage folks to think about developing a diverse mix of funding. So many of the projects that were showcased today are pulling again from local government funding, from county funding perhaps, MEA and federal dollars to really make sure that these projects can get off the ground. And so thinking about it from a diverse mix of funding rather than just a one grant opportunity is something that we really help communities think through. Okay, next slide. Thank you. So there's a lot to navigate through when we talk to communities about how they would go about funding and financing their projects. And one of the things that most communities seem to say is that there is this real challenge of understanding where to start, how to get started, where to find these opportunities, and where they really should be investing their time. And so one of the things we really encourage local communities to do is to tap into technical assistance programs. So there are a number of different organizations out there who are designed to really help think through how do you become ready for solar? How do you think about energy efficiency? And these are some of the programs we've worked with local governments throughout the state of Maryland to really help to advance their energy efficiency, their renewable energy, and their energy storage. So I'll go ahead and just mention a couple of these and then talk about what sort of opportunities these different resources provide. So again, with the passage of the American Rescue Plan Act and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, local governments have an opportunity to take advantage of these new federal funding opportunities and think about energy efficiency policies and renewable energy policies. And so many of these programs have developed really amazing tools to help navigate how do you start to think about developing your portfolio of projects. What are some high impact projects that you might want to consider as a local government? And then they have some great grant search tools that allow you to put in the parameters for the type of grant you're trying to pursue or the type of project you're trying to pursue and what grants might exist out there, either at DOE or EPA, at some of these different federal agencies. In addition, the Environmental Finance Center has been working with the ACEEE, the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy, to help communities in Maryland specifically develop their own climate action plans and develop energy efficiency action work plans so that they are ready and prepared for pursuing these various federal funding opportunities. Currently, we're in the middle of a webinar series with them. I'm going to go ahead and put a link to that webinar series in the chat box here if you're interested. Really thinking through and talking through the federal funding that's available and how you can tap into those opportunities. ACEEE also has developed a ready-to-go toolkit. This toolkit really helps to think through what are some of the projects and what are some of the processes you might want to strengthen within your community in order to be ready to receive funding from the federal government, especially as there's more and more opportunities available. And again, sometimes we might have interest in a particular project, but need support from our local leaders. And so they've also developed a mayor's toolkit, which can be used to help build buy-in and help build support from local officials and help drive what types of projects your community might be able to pursue. I also put up here the SoulSmart program, which is a program really helping to identify good solar policies. Oftentimes when we talk to communities, they are interested in finding funding. And one of the things we say is, like, let's take a step back and make sure that your community has the correct policies in place and the correct strategies in place so that you can really pursue these funding opportunities in a strategic way. And so if you haven't already looked at SoulSmart for examples of how to build renewable energy generation for your community and which policies and practices you might want to adopt, this is a really great program that you can take a look at. Let's see. I will go ahead and say, go ahead and go to the next slide. And then, just I mentioned earlier that there's all these new opportunities, and it can be hard to figure out which ones to pursue. The Rocky Mountain Institute created an amazing database that allows you to easily go ahead and put in the parameters of the types of projects you're trying to pursue, and will identify the types of funding opportunities at the federal level that are available to you. So in addition to the great grant funds that are provided by MEA, in addition to your local government funds that you're helping to match some of these project financing needs, there are also federal grants that you could take advantage of, and tons of resources both at the state and federal level that you can help navigate which opportunities might be best for you. And then I'll just say one last thing is that in addition to partnering with programs that can help build your capacity, one of the things that we find oftentimes is partnering with an engineering firm that has the experience to apply for some of these funding opportunities. Right, FEMA funding, DOE funding can be incredibly complicated, and for especially small local governments, it can be really challenging to go in on that on your own. And so finding a technical service provider who has experience with these types of funding mechanisms can be incredibly helpful. But before you jump into trying to find an engineering firm who might be able to help you apply for this funding, there are some sort of rules of thumbs or best practices that you as a local government can do to help prepare you for building that relationship. So factors that can make communities more attractive to engineering firms or help you be a better partner is really, being able to outline the experience that you've had with developing energy-related projects, really making sure that you have clear institutional knowledge of the energy projects that have been pursued and where you guys are trying to go. Making sure that even if you are sort of strapped for capacity, that when engaging with these technical service providers, you can be responsive to requests for data, and be able to provide quality data as you go through these processes can be very helpful, making sure that when you are pursuing funding, you can be ready for that. And then really, willingness to collaborate on these grant proposals with your partners, and making sure that there's staff and community buy-in. These are all strategies you can take to make sure that you're ready for these partners to help you apply for funding, and that you are ready when you are pursuing funding to be successful in these grant opportunities. So I think that's the last slide. And I know that there are probably a ton of questions, and we want to make sure that we have opportunity for conversation. So I'm going to hand it back over to you, Kathy. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Brandy. You all did a great job. Brandy, the resources that you made available through your organization to the audience are spot on. Let me just ask you a question specifically about communities working with your organization. Is there a cost for them to obtain your services to prepare for a project? Talk to us a little bit about how the Environmental Finance Center works in that regard.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And so, Kathy, for the Environmental Finance Center, when we work with local governments, when we work with communities, helping to either shepherd them through a grant process or help think through their climate action plan, we try to build those costs into grant programs or other project opportunities that we have available to us. And so we don't typically charge a fee per se, but we will work with local government as we're developing the project to pursue funding opportunities in different ways.
Great. And I do want to take this opportunity just to do a brief commercial for the Maryland Clean Energy Center, because our role in this, we can partner with all of our presenters and with communities. And our, as Brandy mentioned, we're focusing on bringing some technical support, some procurement assistance, and finally, the ability to stack capital and different financing and funding solutions to get a project completed that would include incentives, grants, equity or debt. And MCEC does have the ability to issue very inexpensive tax-exempt bond financing. So we want to be looking at partnerships. I think that's a theme that I heard through all of our speakers' presentations. How do we make sure that communities have the capacity to do what they need to do and want to do? So that will take me to my question for the whole group of you. And then we'll look at some of the questions that are being asked in the chat. Thank you, panelists, for answering them. For audience, if you're seeing the questions, you'll see that some great resources and answers are being provided. So for all of you, what do you think keeps a community from addressing this need to be resilient and to provide resources for their communities? What are the roadblocks that we could help remove? Dave, do you want to start since you're on the ground with Groundswell?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's a great question. And I think the nature of the projects that we've been discussing today is that they're sort of overwhelming. If you're not working in this space, they can be daunting from a technical perspective. They can be hard to understand what to make sense of and make sure you're not, being sold on something that's not really going to benefit you. So I think having organizations like those on the call today that, you can sort of trust to explain the projects and how they work and what kind of things to look out for and be aware of. I think that's a pretty important piece because, yeah, I mean, we talk to people all the time who just, they've heard of solar, they think it's interesting, but beyond that, it's sort of just this daunting wall of technicalities that I think there's a big opportunity to help folks overcome.
Brandon, do you have some thoughts on that question?
Sure. No, that was a great introduction to the main problems we also see, Dave. I mean, you're on the ground, you see it every single day, and the uniqueness of your project really, I think, highlighted, you're working all these different communities to try to get buy-in on this concept of a resiliency hub. And that sort of ties into a little bit what overall, not just resiliency hubs, but like if you're looking at a community that wants to take a look at a community microgrid to harden critical infrastructure or something like that. One of the biggest problems, and I know I talked a lot about it on my presentation today, it really is getting that stakeholder support, and that comes in various ways. So when you're working with a community, you've got executive leadership, you've got all these channels and all these parties that you have to bring into the conversation when you want to build a community microgrid. You've got facilities management to consider, you've got, like I said, executive leadership to consider, you've got finance to consider, and they're all looking. They have a lot of duties every single day. They have their area of expertise, their area of focus, and they often have many things happening at once, as all of us in government are no stranger to. So having to deal with a complex system like this, and not only the engineering, the procurement, all of that, getting the affordable financing, all of this is a really heavy lift. And so if you don't have the key information in front of you to really talk to these parties in ways that resonate with how they view the value of what you're trying to pitch to them, you're never going to get anywhere. And so I think that when a challenge that really needs to be overcome, especially in community microgrid and DER system adoption, is making sure that not only do you have the deliverables like our Resilient Maryland program funds in hand so they can articulate that value proposition to the various stakeholders you're trying to target, but having them in the room together. One of the key components of our program is to include a project stakeholder working group as part of the entire, Resilient Maryland project. We want your leadership in the room. We want your designers in the room. We want the utility in the room. If you can get the utility involved, that really helps cut down on roadblocks when it comes to scheduling interconnections and things like that. So open lines of communication, identifying the right stakeholders, producing meaningful deliverables that articulate the value, and having everybody in the same conversation.
Textbook answer, Brandon. Thank you. Well done. Charisse, do you want to comment?
No, I really think Brandon hit the nail on the head. I think the stakeholders are key in helping them understand where to start, how to start, who to talk to, and the importance of understanding the different interests that each of those stakeholders might have is truly critical to the success of any project. Because as Brandon mentioned, the facilities manager and the CFO are going to have different perspectives and look at the value of it differently. So you have to be able to articulate and have the folks at the table that can express their interest and understand how to meet those interests in getting the project moving forward.
And that's a good segue, Brandy. I'm going to go to you on this. I think sometimes one of the hardest things to do is to get community stakeholders in the room, especially in LMI communities where people are really focused on making a living, taking care of their kids, getting things done and going to school. So how do you address that challenge, or how can we make it more feasible for community leaders to participate and develop projects where they're most needed?
Yeah. Before I answer that, Kathy, I just wanted to add one more thing to the previous question. One of the things that I have found working with local governments, especially those who are pursuing grant funding opportunities, is that there seems to be a gap between the grant application process, right? Needing to have things a little bit further along the design process or in the planning process so that they can show that there's a good cost benefit analysis of their projects. And not really quite necessarily having all of that information available yet, because they don't have the resources to even do that analysis or to engage those engineering firms. And so there's a bit of a, I think for local governments, especially a funding gap to do some of this prep work that's even necessary before you can really engage in project development. So let's say you do, get a grant in the door, and so you really want to make sure that as you're developing the whole project, you're engaging local residents, especially those members who are oftentimes excluded, overlooked, or not really, their voices are really being heard. How do we do a better job of engaging? This is also sort of a catch-22 situation in terms of we got to slow things down, right? Which most projects don't really want to slow down. They want to be moving pretty quickly and getting into the implementation phase. But in order to get that good buy-in, you got to work at the speed of trust, which means building those relationships early and often. And so, by the time you have the grant funding in the door, hopefully you'll have already engaged your residents, engaged those communities, which requires a lot of intentionality, can go slow. And so making sure that you have set that groundwork before the project funds are even in the door, I think can be challenging, but ultimately will help the project move faster once you are ready to do so.
That's a great point. And again, just a quick commercial for MCEC. We are looking at the federal funding opportunities specifically to address that gap, to see if there's a way that we can apply for funding to help communities prepare those project designs to be ready for the other piece, which is funding the actual implementation. But, and I think what's been great about this particular webinar is that we're seeing that there are various aspects of resources from different organizations existing in the state that are available now to help put the communities in that position. MEA's grants, your resources, the technical expertise of our partners like ESCOs, NORESCO, and Groundswell. We can do this if there is motivation from a community. I wanted to give you all, since we're just about at close, but there's a little bit of time left to give you all sort of a last crack thought at what we've talked about today, or what you would like to tell the audience, or Sharice, you've had the most time to breathe. So let me start with you. And if you want to just give us some closing remarks, that'd be great.
Certainly. I'd say the one point that I probably should have said at the very beginning is that the success of these projects often depends on right-sizing the project. So energy efficiency, while, that's not the initial focus for these projects, if you start there, it can help fund many of these projects to grow to the size that they are now. Because, for example, the one microgrid project that I mentioned for Connecticut for Groton, that actually was funded partially by $7 million in energy improvements that were done at the base. So that's a great place to start. And then the project can grow outside of that.
So just to be clear, the savings from the improvements frees up capital to fund other measures.
Exactly.
And that's also something that MCEC can help with. So financing using the savings is really a really great model to look at. So something to think about for communities. Let's go to Dave. Dave, your closing remarks, any thoughts?
I wanted to just mention, there was a comment or a question that was raised in the chat, I think, about what the green circles were on one of my slides. There was an image of the design, the solar design with green circles around it, and that's just indicating tree cover. And that's an image that I took from the helioscope design software. So it is a little distracting visually, but it's that's what that represents. Wanted to just mention the Inflation Reduction Act has monumental implications for projects that we've been kind of projects that we've been talking about. I don't think any of us here today, if anyone does know how this is all going to work, please call me. There's a lot of details still to be worked out, but I think the framework that it sets for the supportive framework for seeing more projects and projects with expanded benefits is really fantastic. So we're really excited to see how that takes shape, and just wanted to put that out there as something to be aware of and look out for.
I think that the Inflation Reduction Act definitely identifies the what, but the how is still really up in the air. And we're looking at a couple months of internal thinking with government agencies before the funds start to flow. But for our audience to understand, that's an opportunity for you to get your ducks in a row and your desires and your vision down and start pursuing, teeing up your projects for when those funding announcements do come out, because the what is clear. There is an opportunity here to get the types of projects we're talking about today funded using some federal resources in the future. Brandon, do you want to close out real quick?
Sure. Yeah, I think that the fact we touched on all these federal funds coming out is a really important thing. It's a great note to wrap this up on. My advice with that coming down the line, and I say this with resilience planning, and no matter what, financial or economic environment that we're looking at, the best time to start looking at it is yesterday, but the next best time is today. You want to get ahead of these things. You want to start your analysis early. There's a lot to do in the beginning when you're looking at a resilience project. There's the planning, it's no joke. There is a lot of it, because you've not only got to identify your stakeholders and get them in the room to talk to each other, but you really need to early on figure out what the financials of this thing's going to look like, what the risk is, because that's going to be key into getting, favorable financing, is to buy down that risk. These systems are, while they're becoming more commonplace and more recognized as a, streamlined thing in the energy industry, capital providers still need more assurance that these things are a good and worthwhile investment. So getting that analysis done is really important. And as we face this inflationary environment, as we face these challenges coming down the line in the energy markets, the IRA funding, the IIJA funding is going to be crucial to that. There's some really powerful incentives coming out. So the time to act and get ready for that is now, because once they announce funding, I can imagine it's going to get really competitive really quickly. So start early, start often.
Great point. Great point. We've heard that. And Bruce Clark asked in the chat, what is the best example of a successful project that could be duplicated? I think we saw some great case studies from all of our presenters today, for community facilities managers, wastewater treatment plants, hospitals, schools that are centers for shelter, particularly in rural communities when there are weather events. You want to be looking at what does it take to continue to function as a society and as a community, and how can that be the center of where you would apply a hardening application. Brandy, you're going to get the last word from the panel. Do you want to give us some quick closing remarks?
Yeah, so a couple thoughts. One is we didn't mention the Maryland Climate Solutions Act Act. but that I think that's going to have a lot of benefits and strong implications on the types of projects moving forward. So keep an eye on that as that starts to evolve and the implementation plans and the funding starts to flow with regards to that.
Absolutely.
And then the last thing is I'll just say, we talked about this before, but don't discount community engagement. Start that now. Start identifying the wish list of projects that are important to your community members, and then leverage those no-cost and low-cost resources like the University of Maryland EFC, like MCEC, like MEA. These are resources at your disposal. And so even if it feels like you don't have time, take that opportunity, send out that email, send out a phone call, and get those conversations started, because that way, when there are larger pots of money available, you can be ready.
Great closing note. And for technical expertise, panelists like Charisse and Dave are available to answer questions and walk you through, as you're thinking about project design. So thank you, panel. We are so grateful for your time and your expertise today. I just want to mention that we have some upcoming webinars. Our next session is on the 27th. We'll be focusing on shifting to a zero emission fleet, infrastructure planning, financing, and management. I encourage you to participate on that session. We're not just going to cover EV, we're looking at hydrogen and sustainable aviation fuels as well. Fascinating topic, very intense panel. Please join us for that. Once again, I want to remind everybody that the recording for today's session will be available at www.mdcleanenergy.org/speaker series. And we look forward to seeing you at our next program. Thanks again, everyone. Bye.